have long fancied myself a bit of a fashionista. And that's not just because I recently got into Dress to Impress. Ever since 2014 Tumblr days and the height of the twee hipster era, I've had an interest in styling and photographing clothing. Subsequently, getting into fashion magazines and clothing, and then hanging up any spread that caught my interest onto my lime green walls. I was in my brat era before brat even existed. Charlie babes, where's my royal ease? That is to say, yeah, you are going to find me on fashion TikTok or fashion YouTube watching styling videos or hauls. So imagine my surprise when my two loves in this world collided around last year. Fashion and Shoujo manga. Namely with the trend that happened to pop out of nowhere, where girls were dressing up like shoujo manga characters, i.e. the Shoujo Girl trend. At first, the whole trend was cute, and I can't say no to my two loves blending. But as it went on, it became clear to me that the Shoujo Girl fashion was just a rebranded coquette style. Something TikTok likes to do every 2 to 4 business days with whatever new aesthetic they've decided to come up with, so you'll buy more clothes. Anyway, in my eyes, every outfit was starting to look more like an exaggerated hachi girl and less like a main character shoujo girl, which made me realize something I probably should have already. If I can picture what a shoujo girl would look like in 2025, 2015, or even 1995, then shoujo manga and fashion must be inherently entwined with each other. It's not hard to see how this wouldn't be the case. From Jimmy Choo collaborating with Sailor Moon, to Rosa Versailles inspired imagery featured on the Moschino 2020 runway, shoujo series have constantly been inspiring fashion designers and vice versa. Not just that, but shoujo manga could probably neatly outline the popular aesthetics and trends of J fashion in each decade. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty, and yes, that is a pun, I need to admit that while I may love shoujo manga myself, I do not give shoujo girl in my everyday attire. I'm more of a shoujo male lead who's hot, sad, and a little bit desperate. And I can't do a fashion video without showing off actual fashion. So instead of reheating the nachos of other fashion YouTubers who have already talked about this shoujo girl trend, I figured, why not share the nachos instead?
Oh, wow. Thanks, Colleen.
Is that the microwave that transports food to Australia? Yeah. It is. That's right. I've enlisted the help of the most fashionable nerd and closest to an IRL shoujo girl I know on YouTube, Steal the Spotlight, to help give us some visual references to shoujo fashion across the decades. We'll be hearing from Katie throughout the video on her takes of what a shoujo girl would wear in different eras of manga and J fashion. We can't discuss the fashion of shoujo without talking about why fashion and shoujo are so interlinked in the first place, though. And honestly, it could just be as simple as the fact as shoujo is directed to young girls who often have an interest in fashion. Style and clothing have long been one of the biggest markets that advertise to young girls, like dolls when they're kids or Claire's when they want unsanitary ear piercings. Women's apparel also makes up one of the largest apparel markets in Japan. So it'd be silly to find a shoujo magazine that doesn't appeal to this consumer market as well. The magazines are all about what girls want, after all. And as such, there's an ebb and flow of popular titles influencing the larger culture of Japan Japan and media. Shoujo magazines that focus more on stories with relatable protagonists like Ribbon, Betsuma, or Margaret are going to focus more on the popular trends of the average high school girl. Not just in the kinds of stories or characters they like, but in the real life trends too. The latest clothing styles are going to pop up in the latest shoujo manga because they want to appeal to the current day readership. They'd want their main protagonists to be trendy, so the girls who are reading it can envision themselves as wearing the same clothes too, and then they'll want to come back to the magazine. In the early days of shoujo, this led shoujo magazines to doing free gift promotions where they would give away an article of clothing that a heroine wore. And in fact, Ribbon magazine still kind of does this because it will feature outfits or styles that characters in the manga featured would wear in the front of the magazine. The interest that girls have in fashion was also reflected in the stories as well. Many shoujo stories over the years have had fashion as a main subject. In a manga like Lovely Complex, the main character Risa's fashion sense throughout the series spurs her to become a stylist. Other examples like Neighborhood Story or The Older Work Designer have the main character aspiring to make clothes themselves or work more directly as a model. It sells the fantasy of these dream jobs that are often unattainable while giving that sparkly feeling of being involved in that industry, all while showcasing the cutest and latest fashion trends of that era. Another aspect of the constant entanglement between shoujo and fashion is the fact that a lot of shoujo mangaka work in fashion magazines. Paradise Kiss, a series about modeling and designing by Ayazawa, ran in the fashion magazine Zipper. Popular mangaka like Moyoko Ano and Kyoko Okazaki both had serials in the budding fashionista mag, Cutie. Even when I browsed through some older publications of 17 Japan, I often found advertisements for shoujo magazines like Margaret or Betsuma, cross-promoting the entertainment for young girls with their everyday lives. It's no surprise that these shoujo mangaka were mingling with fashion, as even mangaka from the dawn of shoujo time had ties to this industry. Junichi Nakahara, an illustrator for Shoujo no Tomo in the 1920s, has had some of the largest influence on the art of shoujo manga as a whole. His drawings were modern. The girls had large, wet eyes and thin, wispy bodies, which went against the grain of beauty standards of Japan at the time. Nakahara was inspired by dolls which he used to work with, and the shoujo girls began to reflect that, making them the perfect canvas for modeling outfits too. Further, Makoto Takahashi, who was a mangaka from the 1950s, introduced paneling that was completely separate from the story itself. He would place full-body figures of characters on the sides of his stories that featured outfits from different characters in the series. Largely just for decoration, these illustrations would still capture the readers by giving them kind of a mini fashion show in the middle of a manga. This style of paneling trickled down to other mangaka as well and is now a very popular, common thing you'd see in manga. And in my opinion, that's also why you'll see an outfit scene in a lot of shoujo manga, which is a full body figure of the character in their new outfit. All this to say that, yeah, shoujo and fashion are like peanut butter and jelly. They may be two separate things, but once smushed together, you can't isolate the parts. That definitely made sense as a metaphor, don't think about it too hard. So when streetwear and fashion became more prevalent in Japan from the 70s and on, shoujo manga had to stay on top of the trends. Even though shoujo was around for decades before this, it did take until around the 70s for the fashion industry to start gaining steam, and around this same time period is when shoujo started to break out out critically as well. World War II had just left Japan in a devastating state, and whether for financial reasons or emotional ones, no one was really wanting to express themselves in vibrant clothing at the time. This, coupled with the fact that clothing was still basically just handmade and no designers or brands were really popularized yet, meant that fashion wasn't really the top priority for quite some time. This doesn't mean that shoujo didn't have an array of fashion in the 60s or even before then, but it was more focused on what girls would imagine themselves to wear and less so what you would see them wearing on the streets. They would often aspire to things that Audrey Hepburn would wear, swing dresses, mod dresses, as Audrey Hepburn was the cinema darling of Japan and still is to this day. Where street fashion really started to come into vogue was with the release of the men's fashion magazine called Popeye. Yes, Popeye like the cartoon sailor. This magazine was focused on that West Coast Ivy League aesthetic, bringing preppy sportswear over to Japan, where it became commonplace to see men or women walking around the streets in blazers, cardigans, and plaid. All-American uniform essentials. We may be weeaboos, but you know what? They're yeehaw-boos over there. It didn't take long for shoujo magazines to also feature styles like these on their covers. Covers from shoujo magazines Nakayoshi and Lala in 1978 and 1983 respectively had their lead characters dressed in chunky knits and mid-length skirts. Their button-up tops and loafers paired with perfectly bouncy, voluminous curls. If TikTok existed in this decade, the Shoujo Girl trend may have looked a little something like this.
So I decided to go down that more preppy avenue, immediately reaching for this mid-length plaid skirt and pairing it back with a very simple blouse. One thing to know about me is I'm incredibly indecisive, so I played around with a few different outerwear options. I think the red cardigan's my top pick for how I'd like to reimagine this era, but I had fun playing around with this double-breasted cropped trench coat. It's almost reminiscent of something you would see a little bit earlier, like Colleen said, with that classic Audrey Hepburn style, and I was particularly inspired by this illustration.
Popeye's popularity led to a sister magazine being created that gained equal popularity, but this time it was for young girls. The magazine was created in 1983 and was called Olive. Yes, Olive, like the cartoon sailor's girlfriend. A fashion magazine for romantic girls that has been attributed to the later to come Lolita trend. Olive quickly became a fashion bible for young teens, which introduced Parisian styles that accentuated cute, girly pieces to an outfit. Skirts were frilly, collars were rounded for that touch of sweetness, and layers were a must. Olive as a magazine was so popular that there quickly became a trend called Olive Girls, of girls dressing like the ones on Olive covers. So obviously with this, the Olive Girl style would find its way onto shoujo magazines as well. This cover of Lala from 1986 looks almost like it was ripped directly from an Olive cover. However, it is also worth noting that many shoujo series in this decade were set outside of Japan and would feature the latest styles outside of Japan as well due to this. A cover issue of Margaret in 1981 was kind of ahead of its time from the Japanese fashion, giving way to that ebb and flow of different medias influencing popular culture. This era of Japanese fashion is when I would really need Katie's help to give the essence of what it was like to dress like this. It is so the opposite of how I dress that I would have to fly all the way to where Katie is just to raid her closet so I could duplicate it. So instead, we'll have Katie do it.
Don't worry, me and my frilly pastel wardrobe were more than happy to be of service, and as soon as I saw this cover of Olive, I was feeling inspired. I love seeing the evolution of the cardigan and skirt getting chunkier and more voluminous, and just in general, fashion choices were a bit more over the top, which is very much evident in what I'd consider to be the key to this style, this ridiculous frilly collared blouse, which, despite looking rather costumey here, is actually one of my most worn items. Honestly, you could break down a lot of the key characteristics and notice that they're still evident today, even amongst some of the most popular designers of this generation.
As fashion continued diversifying, the late 80s found more casual styles coming into everyday wear. Levi jeans were catching on, and sporty attire started to get more popular as Let's Get Physical was a big hit in Japan. According to a Billboard article, back in the day, this record sold almost 10,000 units a day there. Not surprising then that the bright neon colors we all associate with that decade started to show up in shoujo color illustrations in anything from Tokimeki Tonight to Love Me My Night. In that one especially because that series came complete with a male lead who was basically a glam rock hair metal artist. It was truly the 80s. Nothing quite captures this era of pure 80s goodness though, like Cypher does. This is a manga that ran in the magazine Lala starting in 1984. Sure, the series was set in New York, but it did also reflect the styles that were popular in Japan. Many of the color illustrations and magazine covers from this series look like Olivia Newton-John is about to go bully people at the gym. Everything from the neon colors to the excessive amounts of denim to the Madonna-inspired fingerless gloves. Cypher even got an obnoxiously over-the-top 80s music video-esque anime adaptation to boot. Now, it's time to—
Wait a minute. I think you forgot something.
Katie? How can I hear you?
Telepathy. All Australians can do this. Never mind. I need to live up to my username, so I'm the captain.
Wait!
Now. I'm sorry, but it just would have been a travesty not to share these suspender pants. I saw quite a few images with very similar variations. Suspenders and overalls were a common option in the late 80s, early 90s. And as Colleen mentioned, denim was a huge hit at the time. So this is also my take on double denim and how I would style it to still keep that kind of girly element with the frilly collar and the puffy velvet headbands.
Now it's time to 사랑해 no inukum irero to the 90s and early 2000s where J-fashion became a cacophony of different styles. This is an era that most people look at to be the defining time to be a fashionista in Japan and what many people still pull inspirations for their own style from. Several things to note in these decades is that Japan was no longer isolated from current trends or years behind because they're an island nation. The internet started to allow access to the world quicker, which also meant that the latest styles in other countries were adopted more simultaneously. This was instead of years and years later where they were finally exposed to it through magazines. This was also an era where the bubble economy in Japan was bursting or had just burst, meaning the designer brands of the late 80s were becoming harder to purchase because people had less money. So the 90s and 2000s became all about the schoolgirl and her purchasing power. The popular styles in this time revolved around schoolgirl clothing, as well as the rebellion teen girls were feeling due to societal pressures. Gyaru and Joshi Kosei styles were springing up more as Japanese school systems had more relaxed uniforms and allowed girls to mix and match their outfits, giving them a little bit more freedom of expression. Continuing to rebel more, loose socks, dyed hair, and gaudier makeup was starting to become more common, much of which was inspired by the popular J-pop singer Nami Amuro. Her signature look of dyed hair, miniskirts, and thick-soled boots could be seen across both fashion and shoujo magazines. The Shoujo Girl trend would really have been the Amura Girl trend back then. Kogyarus, or high school gyarus, was such an iconic moment of this decade that, like with anything young girls do, it became a moral panic. This coupled with the fact that Enjo Kosei was a big deal at this time, meant that rolled skirts and dyed hair equated to sexual deviancy. Despite the reputation that preceded it though, this was still a popular style with high schoolers, and that is who shoujo is made for. Male editors seemed to begrudgingly allow these styles into the magazines that they were selling. In the book, Straight from the Heart, shoujo editors at the time said sex was a popular theme in shoujo now, so these topics can't be helped. While not all shoujo manga featuring gyaru were sexual in nature, this era was still when many of these styles were in shoujo. It was the era of titles like Ultra Cute, Peach Girl and Gals, series about girls who were self-assured and dressed the part too. These girls were wearing short skirts, long socks or boots, cared about their makeup, and went on dates. Not all of the characters in these series would actually be considered gyaru, but the styles were obviously taken from it.
Although a more uniform adjacent look would be the safer option here, I have to stay true to my heart, and my favorite takeaway from this Garu era is definitely the platform boots, and boy, do I have a pair. For styling, I definitely took inspiration from Egg magazine and series like Gals and Peach Girl. The sleeveless turtleneck and miniskirt is such a classic combo, and I really like how opting for a longer length jacket just balances everything out perfectly.
I think one of the series that highlights the drastic change of styles in shoujo at this time would be Boys Over Flowers. This manga has our main lead, Tsukushi, in very typical 80s styles from her hair down to all of her clothing makeovers. However, after Tsukushi's hair gets chopped off later in the series, she gradually has a style change to be more modern. Her hair lost most of its volume, and her style and many of the color illustrations started leaning more towards the Disney Channel chic of girly, playful, and mixing lots of patterns. As the aughts continue on, trends started getting harder to pin down. With the proliferation of Harajuku and fashion subcultures getting even more niche, there were no longer a handful of noticeably popular styles, just a cacophony of all kinds of people expressing themselves in their outfits. Lolita began to make a name for itself with its doll-like aesthetics. Morike looks were all the rage thanks to stores like Wonder Rocket, and eclectic streetwear capturing all these elements could be found in the pages of a highly popular J fashion magazine like Fruits. Since many of these styles were niche, it's not like you would see shoujo girls in these outfits like they were everyday wear. However, there were still obviously markings of many of these trends across different series. A shorter manga like Kamikaze Girl showcased Lolita, and Honey and Clover was a big inspiration for Morike aesthetics, with the character of Hagumi. The thing you are most likely to see in shoujo manga magazines after this split off of subcultures was moteke, girly styles which was more of the Americanized, fast fashion versions of the olive girl from the 80s. These outfits were maximalists to the core, layering tank tops on top of each other, pairing jeans with skirts, clashing different prints together, funky hairstyles, etc. This is what I mean by Disney Channel styling. I expect Zendaya to walk out of these shoujo series at any moment. This was the late 2000s to mid 2000s of shoujo manga, where anything goes. It's really controlled chaos though, with each outfit still having a touch of girliness with frills, ruffles, or bows.
Okay, now you're really talking my language, because this is my personal favorite era of shoujo outfits and what I'm always featuring in my videos as well. As a maximalist, I love the more is more concept when it comes to styling, but I can acknowledge that not everyone would want to style their floral dress with some camo capris, which is why I also switched it up with a leg warmer and boot combination that still feels very on brand, but just slightly less chaotic.
Coming up on modern day fashion of Japan, it needs to be said that like most things in our lives, the rise of social media has completely changed the landscape of the fashion industry. That, along with fast fashion speeding up the trend cycles and Harajuku fashion in Japan becoming so much more commercialized. Japan is now one of the major fashion hubs of the world and is also a multi-billion-dollar industry. No longer is Japan an island nation somewhat behind the curve, but is now a soft power in their cultural exports. This means, with everything else, styles have simplified. Uniqlo has become a juggernaut of a company in Japan, with most people on the streets wearing it from head to toe. It's both affordable and stylish. I saw a post on the shoujo subreddit about a year ago now, asking why shoujo outfits these days suck, and while I disagree, this is probably the reason why. The former creator of Fruits magazine would actually agree with the sentiment of that Reddit user as well, saying saying that there's no more cool kids to photograph was the reason he shuttered the magazine in 2017. It was most likely the consequence of social media plus good old-fashioned capitalism, a style that unfortunately never goes out of vogue. I will quickly mention though that a new trend has popped up since 2020 called Jiraike. It's basically adjacent to the goth emo trend in America in the late 2000s, but is based in Lolita aesthetics. It hasn't gotten too into the mainstream though, and like Yaru has become a moral panic, which means it's still a niche subculture that shoujo hasn't entirely caught on to yet. There is one series called Tomorrow I Will Be Someone's Girlfriend, which is more shoujo adjacent than just straight up shoujo, that does have a character dressed in this style. But other than that, I still haven't seen it much yet in shoujo magazines. So what are shoujo girls actually dressing in? What kind of outfits would a shoujo girl trend have shoujo girls in? What cute outfit can I make Katie dress up in for the end of this video? All very good questions. From what I could find, most shoujo girls will dress in popular trends that could be found in magazines like Nicola, Nonno, and 17 Japan. Tops are usually very cutesy with that same motif of frills, pleats, or lace. Even layering bralette tops over them for an added statement. All of which won't show too much skin unless it's around the collarbones or the neck. Next, bottoms will be either one of two things. A baggier silhouette, like cargo pants or a maxi skirt. This makes the look modest while still fashionable. Or it will be a mini skirt, which shows off the legs. The mini skirt route is very reminiscent of Nami Amuro style, just making it sweeter. I wouldn't really say you would see much skin on shoujo characters unless it's meant to be a testament to the character themselves. A good example of this would be the main protagonist from You Might As Well Be the One, who wears lots of crop tops, short bottoms, and overall just shows more skin than the average person. When she dresses like this, she's seen as drawing attention to herself on purpose when she just likes these styles. For makeup, you really don't see it that often in shoujo unless you're looking at color illustrations. But whatever you do see in color illustrations, it often stays true to styles that are popular with high school girls. Which means right now, it's all about the very clean, natural look. Emphasis on the under-eye aegyosal and lips is also very in. The aegyosal shimmer can actually be seen in chapter art for some characters where they have a double lash line, and the plump lips that may have once been drawn as just a line some years ago shows how lips are just important for the style now. Lastly, this is more of a trend prediction, but something I saw crop up several times while I was looking and have now become very passionate about: babushka bonnets and headwear. Anytime I see a shoujo girl in babushka now, I add it to my collection. I saw so many of these headscarves worn in fashion magazines for young girls that I could absolutely see this taking over the cover and illustrations of shoujo magazines very soon. In fact, it's already happening. It adds the perfect amount of sweetness to any look that they wear. And now, it's finally time to see the end result of the shoujo girl trend that I have analyzed throughout this video. Katie, please show them how a real shoujo girl would dress nowadays.
Remember when I said I was incredibly indecisive? Yeah, I felt like I needed to round this out with two options here. I felt like I had to include an oversized button down because on my most recent trip to Japan back in October, this was one of the most common styling techniques that I saw. Definitely a very minimal approach that's perfect for more comfortable and casual wear. If I wanted to go for something more dressed up, I think a plain skirt is the perfect option. I love how it really lets the flowy blouse be the main focal point, and then of course reintroducing those lace elements. I think you could even try combining the two aesthetics together for a really interesting look. And you know what? For fun, why not break out the infamous white maxi skirt to finish it off?
Bravo! Bellissimo! If you weren't just to impress, I would give you 5 stars. At the end of the day, this was all in good fun. Like I said at the beginning, I think the Shoujo Girl trend was cute, and it was fun to see these different coquette-inspired styles. However, I did also find it semi-important to make a video talking about how shoujo and fashion often closely show the lives of real Japanese girls. Shoujo mangaka and magazines are always going to be on the hunt for new styles and trends that their readers want to emulate themselves, or things that these authors just find visually appealing. In fact, many trends of different eras may have found their ways into shoujo magazines because mangaka were trying to find timely fashion references. First and foremost, shoujo manga are stories, and it's not just about how cute a character looks in whatever outfit she wears. But clothes can help tell stories in and of themselves. It can give an idea into what kind of personality a character has, or what this character feels comfortable in. Maybe they weren't comfortable in certain clothing at the beginning, and by the end, they are wearing that exact clothing. These are all very important parts of a visual medium like manga. Shoujo, like Bratz or Barbies for some of us here in the States, can be just as much of an inspiration for budding fashionistas or people just trying to find themselves. Unlike the dolls though, these shoujo girls have fleshed out lives along with it, hanging out with friends, falling in love, and developing their own sense of self throughout their stories. And I think this is why shoujo fashion is both so fun and so iconic.